500 pro-democracy martyrs have been slaughtered in Syria in the cities of Daraa and Damascus. As a wave of revolutions spread across the Middle East for democracy, a wave of intrigue from totalitarian regimes such as the Ba'athist Party in Syria have got the green light from the Islamic Republic of Iran in Tehran to slaughter their own people. Also, Hamas has got the green light from Tehran and Damascus to join a Palestinian government, thus outflanking Israeli attempts to maintain occupation of the Palestinian areas. And also the Palestinians may declare a unilateral declaration of independence. How does this leave Hezbollah? Well, this leaves Hezbollah isolated because it fought its war against Israel for the freedom of Lebanon, so it's claimed, and this has some link with democracy in that the Lebanese should have their own national sovereignty and be able to choose their own destiny. It's their land after all. But this leaves Hezbollah looking like a Syrian occupational force. When the revolution reaches Lebanon, how will this play out? And what advantage would this give to the Israelis? These are all questions that I can't answer in this video, but stay tuned to the InfoCamp channel to continue listening. Now, what will happen when the slaughter of people in Syria reaches thousands rather than just hundreds? Just hundreds is enough for me to be considering whether the US or EU should be intervening militarily. Diplomatic pressure is being put on them by the Foreign Minister of Britain, William Hague, and also the Foreign Minister of the EU, Ashton, and also by the US, by Hillary Clinton. So, where does this leave Syria? If Iran seems to cut its losses and leave Syria to its own devices, not wanting a confrontation with the United States and the EU and Great Britain, this will leave Syria isolated, and I'm sure that the Ba'athist regime, which means socialist in Arabic, will fall. But this is not the socialism of the Scandinavian model or the English model of social democracy. This is the totalitarian model of socialism of Stalin and Saddam Hussein. This is why tanks are being used to crush people under their treads in Syria, while they're being used. The tank guns are being used to slaughter people who are standing there defiantly in the streets, bleeding, and yet keeping their hands up with fists clenched, for fighting for democracy, fighting for liberty and equality and fraternity. Syria was once a French colony, and France's ideas may have stayed on in Syria despite the Ba'athist revolutions there and the Ba'athist regime. There is also fears that the Alawi regime, which is linked to the Ba'athist party and the Assad family, may call the Alawi tribes in, as they did in Lebanon, to an insurgencies and cause an insurgency to start to split the Sunni and Shia people in Syria. Now this has already been said, so otherwise I would not have said it on my video. I don't want to give succor to the Ba'athist regime in Syria who is trying to crush democracy. I am for democracy. But we must consider our options. As I said in my last video, EU stands strong. An EU Marshall Plan for the Middle East and stopping immigration. I said that the EU was going to create a Marshall Plan for the Middle East. The Marshall Plan that I refer to was the one that the Americans imposed on the conquered Germans and the rest of the former occupied Europe and in Western Europe, and to rebuild Europe. This caused a multiplier effect to occur, where more capital flowed into Europe, and thus Europe eventually started making its own machine tools and started exporting to the world, and this eventually caused the well the change in the order of the world to become a European world where the United States and Europe were the hyperpowers, and this was all done by the British and the victorious British and the Americans as well. And you can read more about that in Niall Ferguson's book, The Colossus, Fall of the American Empire. He concentrates on the fall. I'm concentrating on the rise of Europe and the rise of America. And if there is a Marshall Plan for the Middle East, similarly there will be benefits to the people in the Middle East for them attempting to reach the point of maximum social benefit, which is far away from them, as production is very low. In our case, production is very high, and our production is actually being wasted in many ways in unattainable surplus. And we have a comparative advantage over the Arabs, and so let's use that technology in production and capital machinery to help them build up their own economies, so that they won't want to move to Europe in the first place. That's the point, and that's what Christian Dorff, the EU Home Secretary, said of the EU Commission in more diplomatic language than me. But what I'm going to concentrate on in the last part of this video is whether the US or EU could intervene. The EU and US could intervene because they have carriers. The Syrians should also be wary of their hermetically sealed borders, because the US has a massive force in Iraq, and the Iraqis have been being trained by the US for many years to deal with counterinsurgency warfare. The Iraqis could be used as the first democratic Arab army to engage a autocratic, authoritarian, totalitarian Ba'athist regime in the history of the Arabs themselves. And there would also be a stirring rally call to both Iranian democracy protesters in Iran and also the Arab patriotism if the Iraqis were able to finally stare down the Iranians and push them out of their own territory by invading Syria with and maybe later Saudi Arabia, with the backing of the Americans and the EU. This would all take place before any Marshall Plan actually occurred, but to get the Iraqis on board would be much easier than to get the Kuwaitis on board, or the Saudis, who are feudalist crime families. Iraq has a fragile democracy, but at least it's a democracy. It has spent a year without a parliament, but then again, and a government. But then again, Belgium has broke their world record for being without a government for 2 years, and Belgium is actually working better than when it had a government, because the local elections there favoured the Flemish parties. But let me not digress. What will Iran do? Well, Iran could start an insurgency in Iraq, but they tried before, and although it was succeeding for some time in dominating the rest of the country, and Iran also has problems with the Kurds as do the Iraqis, and it failed in the east of Iraq, where the Kurds dominated, and eventually the Americans seem to have pushed the Iranians out. The Iranians seem to be more likely to kowtow to America, and unofficially and officially try and make moves towards selling oil to the Europeans and Turkey, which will help them be brought in from the cold. I do not foresee that we should invade Iran, although I've said it perhaps on one of my videos, but certainly something has to be done militarily about Syria. The Americans and Egyptians could certainly take a role, but if the Israelis took part, it would be a military and political disaster in my view. The Hezbollah showed that they could defeat the Israeli armies, and it would open up a war on Israel's northern border. But if the Americans took the leading role and the Europeans were able to get ground troops into Iraq as well, as we've done before, it could be a success.